Hello everyone! We're going to be tackling the second half of the 20 art styles challenge this time around. My hands are tired and my brain is fried from the previous video where I drew all of the human version of my Sona a bunch in 10 different art styles, including Gravity Falls, Pokemon, Studio Ghibli, and many more. If you haven't seen this one yet, feel free to check it out because I actually drew a bunch of humans for once, and you'll probably have to wait another year, maybe 2 years, or, well, probably forever to see me do it again. Anywho, this time around we'll be tackling shows that have animals as their main focus. I was excited going into this because animals are my forte. They're what I specialize in, so it should be an easy, breezy drawing experience, right? Well, it didn't exactly go anywhere near as easy as I thought. So with that being said, the first style up is my own art style. This is the style that I'm absolutely the most recognized for and the style that I've worked really hard for so many years to figure out and establish. Tragedy struck and the recording I took of this ended up being a black screen, so I can't show any of the visuals for it, unfortunately. If you're really wanting to see it, I recommend checking out any of the other speed paints I have up on my channel. I just wanted to show you guys really quick because A, it looks cool, and B, so you can see how my regular style looks in comparison to the ones I'm going to try to mimic. Anywho, let's go ahead and get right into finishing the 20 art style challenge. The first style up is Animal Crossing. I never played the games growing up, but when the lockdown happened, a friend of mine lovingly bought me the game, and I played it for I think over 100 hours. At one point, I even wanted to start making Animal Crossing videos. The game quickly became a comfort game for me, and I was obsessed with all of the villagers, even the less popular ones. I thought it was so cute and so sweet that these little creatures come to live on your island, befriend you, and randomly give you gifts. If you wait a long while between playing the games, you wake up and your villagers are so shocked that you are still alive. I think it's sweet that they have their own little personalities and they're so easily lovable. The game is also one of my absolute favorites to go to when I'm feeling down or sick or something, because who doesn't want a vacation on a cute little island for practically free while cute little animals befriend you? All you do all day is fish, catch bugs, and organize your island. Anyway, the art style for this one was tricky since there isn't really a 2D art style to go off of. I considered if I even wanted to include this game because of the fact that it was rendered in 3D, but ultimately decided to just go ahead and jump in and try it out. I think it turned out really cute. A lot of the cats looked like they're modeled off of the same base, so adding the cheek fluff really made this version stand out compared to the rest. And picking the eyes was really easy, and I think it fit well with the end product. For fun sometime, I really want to edit an Animal Crossing 3D model and reskin it to look like this. I think it would be cute to print it someday. Second up on the list is the My Little Pony art style. And yes, I am working off a base for this one. I struggled whether or not I should try making it in the show style or the comic style, because the comic would be easier to draw in, but for nostalgia's sake and the fun of it, I wanted it to look like an actual character from the show. I opted for a base to work off of because there was no way I would just be able to mimic the show's style freehand. The show's characters are animated as a 2D vector-style puppet rig, and unless I traced over an actual screenshot from the show, I felt like I would not have been able to replicate it the way I wanted to. So, something a lot of people don't know is that my current art style, the art style that I use for cats, was rendered and developed from drawing My Little Pony characters a lot. A lot of the features of my cats came from drawing these colorful little horses, including the eye style, which is why you don't see a lot of other artists draw cats' eyes the same way as me. Anyway, My Little Pony was a hyperfixation that stuck with me for nearly 5 years. I was in the fan base pretty much at the peak of it. I would spend hours and hours enjoying fan theories, music remixes, speed paints, fan animations, and so much more. I had my own set of characters that I made, and I used them in a ton of role plays. I made a handful of short-lived comics, one including a literal zombie outbreak AU type thing years before the infection trend started. Anyway, the art for this actually turned out pretty close to something I would see in the show. The hardest part for me was translating the hair into the simplified way that My Little Pony makes the manes. Getting the line work just right was also difficult, and I noticed it looked too overly done compared to the simple style the rest of the body is in. I love doing this one in particular because it sparked a sense of nostalgia for me and made me start rewatching the series, which reignited my joy for drawing these cute little colorful horses. Up next, I decided to touch on another nostalgic character for me, Garfield. I unironically love Garfield, especially the chunkier version of him from the older comic style. There were many different variations I could have went with to draw, but I settled on making it look like an old panel from a comic. The sketching phase was much easier than the rest of the drawing, And when I got to the line work, I really had to think about how I could make it look like it was ink on paper. The comic artwork usually has a thicker, bold black line work with a bit of messiness to it, since the older ones were hand-drawn. I didn't want this to be an exact carbon copy recolor of Garfield, so I had to go in and alter the shapes just a little bit to add the ear tufts, the cheek fluff, and the shorter tail. So the style of the cat is still there, and the face is pretty much drawn the same, but I made the body round and pudgy and the outline sharper and spikier where the fur is. Since Garfield is an orange cat with black stripes, it was kind of difficult to figure out how I would incorporate the sketchiness of the iconic stripes on a character that, well, does not have any stripes. So I thought about adding black stripes to the calico patches, but thought that would take away from the original design too much since there aren't any stripes or true black colors on the characters. So instead I tried to make the calico splotches in a similar brushstroke, sketchy style, and that seemed to please my brain. I like how loose the patterning ended up. As for posing, I went with what cats do best. I was originally going to make them eating some kind of food because I myself am a huge foodie and love snacks and yummy food. But I thought it would be more silly to have the little guy fishing out of a bowl. Taking reference from the comic panels, I kept the background really neat and simple, including only a counter and a bar stool. Even though that was only 2 things, I think it's still a lot compared to the simplicity of the comic backgrounds, but I guess that makes it more personal. I went in and added the shading touches afterwards. I went in and added the shading touches towards the end because somehow I missed it when I was taking notes studying the original style. There is minimal shading, except for in very tight corners, and it's just black blocked out little scratches. As a final touch, I added my own twist and faded some comic dots in the background for texture and blurred the line work a little bit to make it feel not so crisp. So, here is me as a chaotic Garfield character, just being me and causing mighty amounts of chaos. Speaking of chaos, up next is the infamous Bojack art style. This was another one of the styles that was so far off from my own that I really had to pay attention to what I was doing the whole time. Nothing about this felt natural whatsoever, and I kept having to check references over and over. The closest I could find to a regular cat was the police cat, whose name is lovingly Meow Meow Fuzzy Face. Luckily for me, there are a few cats already in the show that are a variety of breeds, so I had a few characters I could reference for this. The show has an odd take on anthropomorphic animals. Usually when you see humanized animals, they take on the walking stance of humans but keep their animalistic features like paws. This is a unique case where the animals are mostly human but with an animal's head. Their hands, feet, and anatomy from the neck down is mostly all human. Their faces are weirdly accurate to the animal that they're depicting, with many, many tiny squiggles to show what their fur is. The cats kept their smaller cat-shaped eyes and mouth and such. No exaggeration really, so shape language was out of the question here, and it made it difficult to define my character's triangle cheek floof. The show's cats have general fluffiness with not much stylization to it, so it was tricky to get it to look right. It's definitely one of the more unique takes on it, and I think it works in the favor of the show because the characters are supposed to be more personable and human-like while adding interest and diversity. Bojack is another one of the shows that's puppet rigged, so that's why the characters are so simple and rigid and designed to be split into layers. This means it carries the same sized line work throughout the character art, so I had to use a brush that allowed little to no pressure fluctuation. The lines are consistent in size and smoothness too, so the line work had to look like it was drawn in one concise swoop, if that makes sense. It made sense in my brain, so I'm hoping that made sense out loud. As for colors, like the different patterns on the characters, there isn't any outline for it, so it's just the color slapped on top of the layer underneath, so that was pretty simple. Probably one of the most simple color jobs out of all of the styles that I tried to tackle. In terms of character, they also usually wear human clothes rather than having exposed fur, so the flannel went well here. The style was so simple that it was actually difficult to do because of the simplicity of it. These types of styles always tend to get me the most because I'm having to toss out all my prior knowledge and muscle memory just to get it to look right. And here's how the style turned out. Scooching right along, we have the Littlest Pet Shop style. I pondered for a really long time brainstorming how I would approach this. It's similar to Animal Crossing in the sense that there is a possible 2D and 3D style, and I have the choice to pick between the two. I could base it off the show's style, or I could try and draw my idea of what a Littlest Pet Shop looked like as a drawing in 2D, or I can attempt to make it look 3D with airbrushing shading, or I can try and make a 3D model and map one. Or I can try to paint over an actual physical Littlest Pet Shop. Because of how excited I was about this part of the challenge, I had so many ideas, and I wanted to tackle all of them at the same time, but I knew that that was not a good idea. There are so many endless possibilities with what I could do, and it was really hard to narrow down exactly what I wanted to go with. After much contemplation, I decided to go with a 2D render with 3D shading, similar to how I tackled the Animal Crossing one. I kind of want to do a Littlest Pet Shop repaint at some point, but I would want to do that as a whole separate video rather than trying to combine it into what's supposed to be a drawing challenge. So back to the actual drawing and art aspect of this. Sketching was probably the easiest part of the entire process because I had a lot of fun trying to mimic the style that I originally learned to draw back in my elementary school years. At some point in the future, I will go on a long, drawn-out ramble about my LPS era of art back in elementary school, but for now, all you need to know is that these little guys were a formative part of my early art interest. After spending an eternity shading and trying to get the proportions accurate and the colors and the shading just right, I finally ended it by placing the character next to an LPS playset just for funsies. Here's how it turned out. With all of the cozy feelings bubbling up from the Littlest Pet Shop drawing, I figured the next style should be Bluey. It is as equally heartwarming and super cute as it is currently a huge fixation of mine. I feel like had this have aired in the early 2000s, I would have been in love with it just as much as I was by LPS and all of the other nostalgic things that I hold dear. From the bright, fun colors to the gorgeous backgrounds, to the lovable characters, the cute story arcs, Bluey is a modern masterpiece that is hard to not like. It was the adorable, bubbly feel and the colorful, unique style that originally drew me into wanting to watch it in the first place. I've seen a lot of cartoon animals in my days, and I have to say that the Bluey style is one of the cutest. It's also another show that is puppet rigged, but instead of making the characters super stiff and rigid with bold outlines to hide the layers in between, they actually made the animation incredibly fluid. Oopsie, I kinda went on another ramble. So let's swing back around to the drawing. The main problem I encountered with this style is that everyone in the show, they're dogs. There are no other species of animals in the show besides different dog breeds, so I had a hard time thinking about how I would make it look kind of cat-like. I thought about making the body more round rather than rectangular, but that ended up taking away from the Bluey feel, and it felt like an entirely different show's style. So I stuck with the same body shape and the same line width and color. I just made the nose a little bit shorter to look like a cat snout and gave the character more of a cat smile. This was one of the shows where the line work isn't actually black, it's just a darker version of whatever color is touching. The lines sort of look like how MLP does their lines. This is actually something I do often, so it wasn't that big of a challenge. I didn't know if I wanted to include the piercings or not because the characters that I modeled off of are children, and I feel like it would look a little bit strange for a kitten to be wearing piercings. But it is a signature part of my character, so I ended up keeping it. I kind of want to redraw this at some point using one of the adult characters as a model rather than one of the healer pups. While it doesn't look exactly like the Bluey art style, I think it's still incredibly cute and I adore that it's my character in the style. Here's how it turned out. Next on the list is Beastars. Despite being completely 2D animated, a large portion of the show looks like it's straight from a hand-drawn anime. This is one of the most unique styles I've ever seen for anthropomorphized animals, because it's not only a mixture between animal and human, they take on some anime art qualities into the mix. I can't think of any other media source out there that even looks remotely similar to the rendering style that Beastars is made in. And it's not just the characters that look like they're hand-drawn, the background scenes too, as well as all of the line work and all of the shading and the color. The 3D and CG combination makes for a very smooth animation with a distinguishable style. I don't know how to explain it other than they're very humanistic with specific animal traits highlighted. They have mostly human anatomy, but it varies depending on the species. This is also another show that gives them mostly human hands, which I wasn't looking forward to try and draw because I'm not very good at hands. But anyway, all of these qualities and quirks from the show left me with a lot to work with and a lot to consider about how I was going to render this. I've drawn characters in the Beastars style before, so it's not my first go around with it, but it somehow was particularly difficult with my personal character. I think it was the same challenge I had with the Bojack style, where it was so far from my usual style and leans towards cartoon realism that I was struggling to get it down. I really had to consider the eye shape and the line placements to make this fit in. The line work was mostly thin lines and the coloring was mostly flat color with some shading over top, but the shading in the show is so crisp and so good and it really looks 2D. So I made a shading overlay to mimic the show shading and fit it in with a warm background. I'll be honest, I had to make like 3 separate sketches for this and I scrapped all of them and this is the one that I ended up landing on. So it's sort of recognizable as Beastars, so mission accomplished. Here's how this fake screenshot turned out. And now onto one of the more complex styles, the brand new animal art style. One of the biggest things that stood out to me from this anime was the backgrounds and the color usage throughout the whole series. Humans that turn into animals is a commonly used concept, but this show handled it in a crazy unique way. Some characters are just straight up animals that can talk, like the Mink character who had mostly animal features. And some characters are very humanoid, keeping a human-like face structure and showing small traits of animals such as nose and ears. And other characters were just a mix between the two. There's a variety of character designs in this, which is one of the reasons I wanted to try it out, just to see how my character would look. I think mimicking anime styles is one of the most challenging things I could have chosen to do, but also one of the most fun things because of how stylistically interesting they are. Once I learned that blurred overlay trick, everything was over. I definitely replicated that iconic anime look. The colors used in the show, both environmentally and character-wise, are fantastic and very pleasing to the eye. For the scenery, I just picked an inner city screenshot where there was a lot of neon blue lighting because I wanted to stick with that cyber poppy feel of everything. This was definitely one of the more challenging of the bunch since the art style was so specific, and given that I'm not used to drawing humans, and I'm pretty out of practice drawing humans, drawing humanoid creatures poses a threat to my sanity. Jokes aside, this was one of the more challenging but fun ones I did, and I greatly enjoy how the colors and atmosphere turned out on this one. Moving on is Oliver & Company. This is one of the ones that is closest to the Disney sketchy style. I had to include a style that was similar to this because it was probably the most iconic. I was gonna go with the Lion King, but that would have ended up looking too lion-y for my liking. I also considered doing the Aristocats, but opted for Oliver & Company instead because it was more round and cartoonish. And it fit more into the well-known quote-unquote Disney style. This was a childhood favorite movie of mine, so I was a bit biased when picking. Movies like this sparked my fascination in kittens when I was a lot younger, and it made me always want to have one. I'm also a bit of a sucker for older animated films that are hand-drawn. Somehow, it's not a very well-known film. I feel like it was the start of the whole dynamic of kittens being raised by a pack of dogs, which led into the trope of unsuspecting species being raised by a completely opposite species. I want to say that the Disney style is something that my art is compared to the most, and I believe that comes from the eye shape and the eyebrows for the most part, which is ironically evident in this style. Maybe that's just because it's really common and a lot of people know it, and the box around the eyes is tied back to The Lion King despite this movie originally being from 1988. I think out of all of the art styles that I tackle in this video, the Oliver & Company style was probably the most refreshing and relaxing to do because it's so similar to my regular style. Everything from the sketching to the loose line work to the coloring was just really fun to do. I will say that depending on what part of the movie you look at, he looks a little bit different, so I referenced the movie cover art for the specific drawing. Also, one of the cutest features, I believe, is the big old fat bappers, the big toe beans, the pobs. This cute tiny little kitten having massive stompers was the cutest thing. Large eyes and a squishy face was not something that I was used to doing whatsoever. And it was really nice to swap up my style for a little bit. I think one of the things that is the most different about my style versus this style is the whisker placement. This seems like a really weird thing to notice, but I've never actually made solid whiskers on my cats that come from their muzzle directly. I've always had them kind of shooting off to the side on their own, where it looks like the whiskers are just floating outside of the cat, like the general idea of a cat having whiskers, but it's not on their face. Mostly because I don't like the lines going across the face and blocking out important details or features. But with this one, I really didn't feel like the whiskers were too cluttered. I think it fit the style really well. I think it was really cute, but I struggled where to place them, so they didn't go over the eyes. All in all, the style was really cute and super fun. This very much so was a breath of fresh air, and I think it ended up looking great. And last but not least is the bad guys art style. This movie was rendered fantastically, and in terms of characters had one of the more unique styles out there. This was another one that posed a quite important question. How in the world do I render this if the original source is in 3D? Ultimately, I went with the same route I took for all of the other 3D to 2D pipelines and tried to render it as close to the original source as I could get through the means of digital painting. And when I tell you this one took the most time, this one took the most time. I was on the struggle bus headed to Frustration Town with this one. The characters I referenced are so cartoony for being 3D, which is another reason I enjoyed it so much, but it made it so hard to translate because my brain doesn't swap between the two very easy. The rounder, squishier shapes and the small beady eyes were some of the first things to stick out to me, so I made sure that those were prevalent when I was trying to mimic the style. There were also no other cats for me to mimic besides the little cat that walked on all fours towards the end, but since they weren't humanoid, it didn't help much in structuring the character or establishing how they'd look rendered. I was quite stumped and frustrated, so I stopped for a little bit and came back to it a few days later, and it was finally going in a direction that I enjoyed. With all the blood, sweat, and tears, here's how the bad guy's art style turned out. Phew! I can finally breathe again. This was the first time I have ever fully completed a 20 art styles challenge. Me from a few years ago would be proud. And I guess it helps that I broke it into 2 sections and paced myself so I wouldn't get too burned out on it. Thank you guys for watching me suffer through this. All jokes aside, it was a great challenge and I hope to take it on again sometime in the future to see where the prompts take me and to see how I improve.